Hey guys, Moshi Mochi here, and we're back with the Bloodcraft Altersphere Take 2 draft infographic. The first thing you might notice is not all the neutrals are here, or at least present at the moment, because just due to the way the template works, if, a bunch of cards end up being on, one side of the priority picks, then it just ends up, just stretching it out a bit, and then I just have to bump the picks down, but, it's perfectly fine. I can just scroll it down sort of like this. The problem with just zooming it out or just, changing the template is I just use this for basically all the crafts, and a lot of people might not know this, but this is actually part of the website I'm making. So, everything I'm doing on the YouTube channel, or at least most of the stuff, like resource-wise, you can actually, eventually, like when the site goes up, you can click on it and then, do the same stuff I'm doing yourself to just look at it or read some effects, stuff like that. But anyway, that out of the way, for now I'll just scroll down when I need to. For the most part, I'll just be mentioning, just your standard hard removal stuff. Maybe say, oh, you might need a 3-drop or something like that. But I'll get to the neutrals when I get to them, and then I'll just scroll down from there. So going on the normal order, we got Gift for Bloodkin, maybe a card that actually takes over the spot of Marduk for being, a bad card in your drafts. So the problem with this card is 0 play point, deal 1 to both leaders. That's perfectly fine. You can get in your chip damage like that. The problem is the symmetrical force bat thing. You have to have followers on board to sort of trade away with the force bat. It's pretty bad to just leave it on the board because it's a free ping for your opponent. They can trade with your own force bat, or they can just trade into something else. You have to have combos for it. You have to either care about the damage to both leaders. Again, free chip damage is fine, but just having random less stuff, or something like Darfy's bat that cares about it, or invocating out a florist, those are constructed things, right? You don't really reliably get these, and then this card's just being down a card, because you can throw it out anytime, but it doesn't really pressure your opponent that much unless you're being super hyper aggressive. But in most cases, you're just maybe you'll end up being a value game, or just an aggro deck that sort of defaults to having some value. And this card's really not good at that, unless you're super high on the aggro leaning scale. So Relinquish Reason. Yeah, this card is pretty fun. If you get it off turn 3, the problem with getting it off turn 3 is you skipped a turn, and it's a pretty important turn for Blood, because let's say you're being aggressive, right? You're being aggressive, and then you just give an opponent a turn to just establish on board. The things you throw down after, they're not going to be they're still gonna have the same defense, and they can still be traded with relative the same way. They're still throwing down small stuff on board, and they'll still have their Evo pings and hard removal, stuff like that. So I'm not saying it doesn't help you there. You can definitely put out more pressure, especially if you have split boards or multi 2-drops or something. But the problem is just skipping your early turns, and you have a similar effect in this card where it sort of mimics it. It's not as strong, but it's definitely more reliable, and it doesn't skip your turn. And then late game, it falls off really hard. Late game, unless you have some card draw or some value going for you, you just have this card, and then you play it, and then you have 1 or 2 cards in your hand. And then the vengeance thing is cute, but it's not reliable, right? You don't have the vengeance up all the time, and then blood cards in your deck. You have removal, you have random amulets that you might be drafting, and then neutral cards that it doesn't buff. So just all those things, it just makes it sort of inconsistent. It's not even super broken in turn 3 or turn 4 in the early game, where you definitely want to be this effect definitely wants to be played. But yeah, it definitely can do some fun things, and you can try some stuff with it, but I don't consider it reliable. So Old Blood King, speaking of an unreliable card, same thing with this card. 5 play point 1/4 ambush. You can just play it down. The opponent can't evo into it. It's pretty hard to remove. But then you have to have combos with it. If you evo it, 3/4 ambush, maybe you go face once, but for the most part you're trading, and then you don't make use of the ambush. This is worse than a Goliath evo. And then you have to actually have the force bash synergy to make it work. You have random stuff. You can get the Nightfall, some Bloodkin is mainly the thing, and then it's relatively okay. And then this card, and then this card. But the problem with these cards is just these cards all come out in the early to mid game, before this card. So then you have to get them in a good draw order, and then even then it's not super unfair the things you're doing with it. So again, high density force bat deck, and then it's not even super unfair in those decks, and you have definitely better 5s you can take over this card. So the Omen of Lust, this thing's more of a constructed card, just because of this clause. 7 or more self pings is definitely very hard to do without a full Lust package and just random stuff to randomly self ping you, especially multiple times, because you curve out regularly, and this is just a 3 play point 1/3, and like the 1/3 stat line's not even that good on a 2-drop, so it's definitely not good enough on a 3-drop. And like again, getting the single self ping, like it's situational, and you might not have the cards in hand to enable it, and then this thing's sort of rotting in hand and curve, and even a 3 play point 2/4 like over the next turn isn't like super unfair. But you know, it's there for like the off chance that you know you might have a high density ping deck and you might be able to make it work. So person, I'll talk about the accelerate first. You know, it's got like sort of the Jabberwocky clause where it's sort of like useful in that sense, but the main problem is it doesn't count itself, like as in you can't just play it as like something random on board. It's just a spell, and then it cares about everything you have on board. Like turn 8, you might actually like be running out of board and you're just waiting for like storms or reach in order to kill your opponent. And then like the things you get from it, like, you know, maybe you get like the Parish combo, but then it just pulls like random stuff from your deck. Like you have a bunch of 2-drops, maybe you have like four spats on the field, stuff like that. They can still pull 2 or 3 drops from your deck. Like it's not super unfair. Like, you know, you're not like Dragon where you might actually have some like super big stuff to pull, and you might actually end up having like big stuff to pull. But the problem with that is just you have to draft like a whole bunch of really big stuff, and it's not even reliable to pull in most senses because again, you have a lot of like 2-drops and like 1-drop tokens in your deck, stuff like that it doesn't really pull. But again, just having like 10 play point 6/6 Stormbane, that's like reasonable enough. You can just use it as like a late game finisher potential, and then the accelerate coming up sometimes is on a red moon or something. It ends up being like okay as just a finisher. So the Omen of One, again, you know, your first pick isn't very safe, but like in the later picks, it can end up being fine. You know, no dupes in your deck, and then it ends up being a premium option. It's just being safe when drafting it. You know, your early pick is definitely quite risky, especially like, you know, there are definitely cards in Blood, especially Blood, which is, I won't shy away from saying it, it's one of the weaker crafts. Like there are definitely cards that you definitely want multiples of in order to have good Blood decks. So Marduk, I won't go over too much since it's basically the same for every craft. You know, the anti-faller thing. Like, the weird thing is, like, there are cards that I won't say are worse than it, that might be less reliable than this card. Just, like, having just a 7 play point 7/7 with some downside / random inconvenience. And then, like, you can randomly sometimes get some upside is, like, good enough. And you might actually draft it over these cards for, like, some of these downsides just to have something relatively vanilla. So speaking of something relatively vanilla, we got Raven, Eventide Vampire. So as a joke, this is just your extra copies of some Bloodkin. Unfortunately, yours is worse than Swords, which is like a late game win condition, you know, Latham. But you know, the Vengeance thing is like cute, you know, free heal, free ping, like you can choose between those, and then, you know, you might have like a pseudo combo with like multiple 4 spats, but like that's not like super important. The main thing is it's just 1 play or 2 play points spawn Oathless Knights, and like that's good enough without any synergy or any bonuses. Like you'll take it as just an extra copy of this card, and you'll be like okay with it. You won't be like super happy with it, but it's still fine and decent in like some aggressive decks. So same thing with this card. It's vanilla most of the time. 3 play point 2/3. Like the enhance. The problem with the enhance, I won't go over the Evo because the Evo is super unreliable. You have to have like a Crimson Desire in the late game. You have to like self ping yourself, and then you have to have like random ways to like ping yourself without the opponent like getting you into a very dangerous life total. So, you know, again, this is like a cheese gimmick. Yeah, you won't rely too much on this. And like the main thing is the enhance. Like same thing with like the hard removals. There's like neutral stuff, in-craft stuff that just gets rid of it. You commit your entire turn to it, like a super giant play. Like maybe like, you know, just like 10-10, 15-15, that ends up being good enough. But again, it's like pretty risky, and you know, sometimes it doesn't work, and it just ends up being average, like the 3 play point 2/3 most of the time, and you definitely have like pretty good 3-drops to take. But Blood does sort of need 3-drops, so you like end up drafting it about average. So that Agito, I forgot to write it here, but you know what the card's named. It ends up being just okay. This clause actually isn't very helpful. It's just the fact that it can rush out for like, you know, 4/3, 4/4, like I won't say most of the time, like sometimes it ends up being that. Like it's borderline like in between here. It's the fact that it's just interaction in hand. It can crash into something, and sometimes it ends up living. Like for the most part, you're not going to make it big for the same reason you can't get this fanfare off. Like you need a lot of lust or self pings that you might not reliably draft. But you know, the fact that it scales in the deck is perfectly reasonable. Just having it, maybe it ends up being like a 4/5 plus, and then it's sort of premium with like the free bubble from like, I won't say pitfalls because those are gone, but some random effects that end up not hitting it. But unfortunately, like it's just damage based removal sort of taking over. So it ends up dying to like pings and damage based removal, which is like the main important thing. But it's like in between here, and you can sort of treat it as average or sort of bad. So Dark Feast's bad. Again, one of the cards I mentioned in the pilot video. It's a fun card to build up. You can definitely have some like really fun decks. You can try going drafting like a full Lust package and end up having like a decent Dark Feast. But the problem is just getting it off. It's actually, you'll find it's really hard to do all the things you want to do in like a Dark Feast bat deck. You need like the healing because you're pinging yourself for like, let's say you have like a perfect Dark Feast bat deck. You're pinging yourself for 10. You need like healing to like complement it. You need like all the consistent self pings too. And then you have to like not be behind on board. Like you still have to do like 10 points of chip damage. Like you just did self pings to yourself. There's no guarantee you did all the chip damage. And then like this ends up being like 8.55 like ping 7, which is really like super good. But like you have to work really hard for it. And then the 7 might not be able to go to face. Like even like trading with it. Like 8.55 ping for 3. Like that effect exists in Shadow, and that card's like sort of here for just being sort of just not, I won't say not reliable enough, but just being like late in the game, and then not having control over the state of the game at that point. Same thing with like Dark Feast bat. Like again, you have to build it up, and then at that point you might be losing or sort of neutral in the game, and then the ping to face might actually not be helpful. So again, you have to work for it, and it needs a very specific deck to be very good in it. And in some decks, it can, in like good stuff follower decks, it might end up just not pinging for much or anything at all in some rare cases. So Legendary Fighter, same thing with like the thing in other templates or other crafts. It's just okay, randomly get Bane, randomly get double attacks, brush, whatever. Like you can take it higher, but like it's just average in that sense. And for Blood, you have like definitely good 2-drops to take. So Vira, we got the Fighter of the Craft. This is a super good effect. Like don't get me wrong, it's just like reliability, all that stuff. It definitely belongs like somewhere here, like around here. Because, again, you might not be able to take advantage of the reduction of damage, like, Constructed, getting Claws off, or maybe a Madness Reveal when you have to heal her a bunch or something. But, this doesn't really help. Like, it's mainly the damage bubble, and that is pretty helpful. Like, you can snowball a board by, like, dropping, like, a 3-drop alongside it. This is relatively hard to remove. They have to evolve something, like, very vanilla into it, and that's really big. And then they play into, like, removal. You still have, like, your random things on board, and then you can, like, snowball by, like, dropping this, or removing it, and then dropping more stuff. So, like, it's, like, very good in that sense. Like, it just trades really well when it evos, but the fact that, it has to evo, I won't say Blood is pressured to have its like evos for other stuff because it actually isn't, but it's just the fact that it has to be in your hand. And you'll find that these sort of like 2-drop evo clause cards, like they're very hard to like keep in your hand. The same thing with like a lot of 2-drops that Blood has that just has a really tough time doing its job. Same thing with this card. You have it in the early game. It's actually sort of tough to keep it because your 3-drop, I won't say is pressured because you don't have like too many other 3-drops to take, so your 2s end up coming out sometimes, and like you can't just skip your turn 3. So like this doesn't end up doing like the evo drop all the time. Like sure, if it ends up going off, like it ends up being here, it's just like a reliability thing. Like when you have it as a 2-drop, you're definitely going to play it out, and then when you play it as a 2-drop, it's just like a solid good card where you just play it and you get a free buff on like your 3-drop or like something random or like you're playing later, and like that ends up being okay. And then like it shoots up when you get the evos off. It's just how consistently can you get like these cards to be your evo plays. Like sometimes like the 4/4 isn't good enough in this case, but it's still a fine card. You can definitely take it as a 2-drop with some very good upside. So Flores, as a joke, like if you play Blood against me and you invocate this out, I'll like concede no matter like what the board state is, because first of all, like this is super hard to do. Like you have to like save up so many self pings, and then like you might have to like draft some like bad cards or something like that in order to actually get those pings to work. And then like the payoff is definitely good enough, but like you have to commit like perhaps some bad cards to it, or you have to have like a bunch of really good cards. Like both of those are like super hard to do. Like 4 pings a turn. Like the payoff's like fun. Like you just draft it as like a vanilla Desert Rider with one more attack and some healing upside. The healing upside is definitely like pretty important for Blood. Like first of all, like 5/3 is like super annoying to like evo into it. You can just drop it on like turn 4 when you're going first, and then the opponent's like I won't say in a predicament, but like, you know, the standard stuff that might evolve into it might actually not be able to trade with it evenly. They might have to like waste a ping and then like evo something else they might not want to evo. And it ends up being like fine. It's just that like the free evo like heal is actually pretty important. Like blood, I'd say like good blood decks, like they don't want to have too much self damage, or they want ways to like mitigate their self burn, because when you self burn yourself for like 2, 4, 6 over the course of the game, like when you get to the late game, like you just lose off like 2 turns of just your opponent like all inning you, and then like you just lose the game from there, where it can be avoided with like a little bit of heal. And then the opponent has to like sort of play a more grindy game with you, where, you know, blood might be able to succeed in. So Milner, this is actually like my favorite blood card. You know, just what's the card? Dark General for like 5. You know, just free vengeance. Like it's vanilla. Like the main thing is, unfortunately, you know, 5 play 1/4/5. Like it's good enough. Like you know, the premium quote unquote 5-drop stat line. You just evo it, crush into stuff. That's perfectly fine. In the late game, it becomes like a crazy top deck. Like if you can get all these effects off, like, you know, Storm, Drain, Vengeance, and like the buff, like that's super good. Or like all together, like top deck potential, Storm potential, like it's like crazy reach with something like a Claw in hand. Like as something you have to play around when you're playing against blood, like just having that in your hand, like just the 2-card combo that's like 10 damage. And I won't say it's not it's reliable, but like, you know, it's always something you can be wary about, especially like in the late game. So it's like it's a very good in aggro, like when you draft aggro, because your curves can be like super low, because you might even value the 1-drops higher. So you know, the dumping your hand might end up being more of a thing, and you know, just having like 7 damage reach potential is definitely something crazy good in blood. So Rose Queen. So this thing can go up and down. The main thing is like you have to draft like a high density of like 2-drops, right? Mainly you might not end up with like 1s at all, like 1-drop actually, and like, you know, 0-drops or whatever. So and it's like the time it comes out, right, late in the game, like 8.66 forward, that's like good enough, like above average. Sure, you can say it's average, you know, Dragonplate Warrior is about that. But the things you transform, right, it matters, right? You might end up with just not things to transform, right? You might just have 3-drops, 4-drops, 5-drops, just like stuff like that. Like your 2-drops might be depleted. They still might be in your deck. You might have played a bunch of them out, but you know, just having 1 or 2 like get this effect off is already like super great. The Crimson Burst are very strong heal and like free damage. Like, you know, I won't say reverse Razor Claw, but you know, a better quote unquote version of this card. So like it's already like a very good card in that sense. But it's just the reliability of having a lot of Bloodcraft cards that, you know, cost 2 or less in your hand to actually get the burst is the main problem with this card. You can't really like draft a deck around. Well, you can, like, you know, just have like 11, 12 2-drops. But then, like, you know, it's just having them in your hand in the late game, because you have those high density 2-drop decks. You just dump a lot. Like, what are you gonna do in your like early 2 to 7s? You're just gonna dump a lot of them on board, because you have to like keep up. You have to do your chip damage. You have to keep up the pressure, or at least stay on board. So it's like problems like that that sort of like, I won't say hold this card back, but like it holds it back from, like, you know, doing the super combo where you get all the bursts in your hand and then you just throw them at your opponent's face. So Moon and Sun, and like the card draw thing is like sort of an issue. So Moon and Sun, like same thing. It actually ends up being better in Blood. As a joke, this card used to be here because like Blood's gold quality, like their gold and legendary quality has been quite poor as of recently. So it was like actually one of its best cards at one point, which was like sort of sad, which is why like the neutrals are sort of here. But again, you know, just sort of good. It like the Amaterasu or the Tsukiyomi ends up being like pretty decent here, because of like you can throw out bats and random stuff for pressure, and then, you know, you're actually trying to be an aggro deck for a lot of your blood drafts. So it ends up being like, okay, here you can weave it out, get some infinite value / card draw, and it ends up being like, okay. So as you notice, like a lot of these cards, like, you know, they are good in like the right situations, but they're sort of like the, you know, just average in the average case, where these are like, you know, vanilla followers. Same thing, these are vanilla followers. All these cards are vanilla followers. So like when you get like here, this is where I sort of like separated them, where these are more like straight up they can actually do stuff on board, or they give a benefit no matter what. So like, you know, you might treat this as a 3-drop. This is actually a 6-drop. You know, 6 play point, 5/4 rush is like good enough, and you know, Blood Moon might enable some random vengeance synergies or something that may or may not end up being in the format later on as well. So like that's already like fun, you know. Free interaction on board. It trades like fairly well when it evos. So like, you know, just six play point interaction. You can just throw it down as the 3, like when you need to curve out. You know, it's got the decent 3-drop stats now. You know, 3/2 trades into 3/3s. So like you'll be fine just taking this card. So Evil Eye Demon, you know, an extra copy of Razor Claw when you want it. Like the evo, like it doesn't have to evo for much to actually like be like premium. Like 5/4 AOE 1 is already like fine. It's like worth 4 play points, and then AOE 2 it gets like pretty good, and then 3+ it gets like really amazing. So like you can definitely like scale it up with like enough self pings that you end up taking anyway. But again, sometimes unreliable. But like the fact that you can fall back on just being a razory claw sort of effect is perfectly reasonable for this card, and it ends up being fine, and it ends up being quite good for the most part. So Thunder Behemoth. This card scales really well into the late game. Like in the late game, it doesn't matter that you're like, I'll use the Hearthstone term, you're overloaded for 3, because 8 play points, you're a pretty low curve deck, so you can basically play anything anyway, and you're sort of in top deck mode a lot of the time without like this card. So just being overstated, like even in like the mid game turns, you can like play this down, ping, like it's super big, right? 8/8, like trade into something, 8/4, 8/3, and then like ping 2, ping 3. Like you'll probably be clear on board as long as you stay neutral for that part. And then this ping can go face if it has nothing to hit, like just 6/6. Like it's pretty hard to remove. They have to hard remove it, and you can still establish like the 3-drop, 2-drop, something like that after. So like it's still okay in the mid game, and like it's very strong in the late game. So Positive Lust, I was like sort of having trouble to pick it or place it. Like maybe when this ends up being 3 columns long or whatever, I can dump Moon and Sun. I can like move this around here, but like symmetrical effect, but it ends up like benefiting you more than the opponent. So like it ends up being like good enough. Like the ping stuff is like cute. The self ping actually like sort of hurts it, but like it pings the opponent, pings you, whatever. Like you get more cards than the opponent. That's like the main reason why it's here. If it was symmetrical, it definitely wouldn't be that good. But the fact that it's free card advantage on a basically vanilla body is definitely something you want, especially in Blood, which has a problem with running out of cards into the late game, because you have sort of, I won't say low quality, but a lot of your cards are sort of vanilla. Your quality isn't like super high, so you definitely have to make do with the good card draw you have. So Vania. A lot of people might not know this, but it actually has a fanfare effect on the non-vengeance. I learned this like the hard way in like one random game, and it's pretty cool. Like the fact that it just has like a freebie on this like fanfare, like it's perfectly reasonable. Just 3/6 spawn 1/1 flexible evo on 6. Like Blood sort of needs 6 drops that you want to like drop on the evo turns. So just being good enough in that sense, it does something when it hits the board. Ping your opponent for 2. That's free chip damage if you're playing the aggro plan. It becomes an Imp Lancer plus on the late game. Flexibility on the Vengeance trigger. You can get the Bats to protect you, or you can get the Banes. Those are both like very solid. And Vania with Drain, Vania with Storm, those are all very good options to take depending on the situation. So Gilneas, this gets the bump of being like, high power level. The draw ends up being like good in Blood late game, and again, the +2/+0, it's good in aggro decks, and Blood is definitely leaning on the aggro side, because your Valley plans aren't very good, or they aren't too high value like on the average case. Like Blood and, or not Blood, Sword and Force definitely do the Valley game better than you, but you have like I won't say better aggro plan, but you have a potentially stronger aggro plan that you definitely want to lean towards, or at least consider leaning towards, because your Valley plans sometimes aren't very good. So again, just having AOE buff for like stuff like Bats and random stuff on board is just like really strong in Bloodcraft. And again, you don't have too many better options to take in this case. So Narmia, I don't know how to pronounce it, but yeah, she's your like self-vengeance card. Like Vengeance doesn't have too many synergies in the pool at the moment, but it can always pop up in the future. And like I always talk about like these Vengeance cards, what is it, Soul Dealer, Belphegor, like they all have their like problems. Like you set yourself to 10 and like turn 4, turn 5, and then like you might think, oh, I'm having this effect, I'm winning. But then like this effect, I won't say like isn't too good, because it's really good. Like 6/5 Bane, kill something, like that trades with everything. The opponent has to like remove it, and then they have to establish again. That's like super good. And if they can't, they have to like evo into this anyway, and then you're like really up ahead. But the problem with these cards is just like, if you're playing a neutral game with your opponent, you just set yourself to 10. You don't have like super Vengeance payoff, like like the Serpent and like the old Golden Legendary picks. Like you don't have something that's like a super high payoff, so you just end up dying to like 2 turns of your opponent just establishing like something mid-range on board or big on board, and you can't deal with it, and then you just die to that. Where like regular craft could just have this sort of effect on just a 2-for-1 ping on Evo or something, and then they can just live off that. So what I'm trying to say is just, I'm not saying it's not good, because it's definitely a good card, But, you know, it's definitely sort of a dangerous card to pick. And, you know, sometimes it can end up costing you if, you know, you drop down to a low defense and then, you know, your opponent kills you over like 2 turns or something. But, you know, it's like 4-3 Bane on vanilla is like super good. And, you know, you can definitely make do with the Evo, which is definitely very strong. So Trill, this is definitely the safest golden legendary in the blood pool at the moment. It's like super strong, like just the options you have. Like unfortunately, it's like bad in the early game. Like, you know, for play point 3/3, like draw a card. Like these cards like scale off the Trill being on board, right? So you get the Maids, which is like free Evo on this, and then heal 2, and then the Demon Song is AOE 2, and then it becomes an AOE 3 on the Trill being on board. So like those are like flexible options, like 6 play point, 5/5 rush, and then you get the Maids on board, and then or you can have like the Gene sort of effect where it's like 7 play point 3/3, like AOE 3. Like you can hold it, you can play it as value, like all those things are like flexible. It just scales really well until the late game. So like you know, try considering like saving it if you can. You definitely have like good 4-drop options to play, and like, you know, even just getting it to turn 6 is definitely good enough. With like you can even like split Evo, and you know the mini heals like helpful. So like all those things are like coupled together into like a really nice package of flexibility and just raw power level that make this card, you know, one of Blood's safest picks. So we go from Blood's safest pick to, you know, one of its dangerous picks. But unfortunately, this ends up being like one of the best cards Blood can take. Just like the fact that you can be reverse snowballed, you can like let your opponent like think they're winning, and then you like hard remove like a 5-drop, a 3-drop, and like a 2-drop. That's like the best feeling in the world. But like, you know, the vengeance can again sort of hurt you. You know, maybe you'll be, you know, quote unquote lucky, and you'll be at like 10 or 9, and then this won't actually ping yourself. But, you know, when you're at, like, you know, 16 or 15, it's definitely very hurtful when this pings you for 7. But, you know, the fact that you're trading that off for, like, 3 destroyed followers, hopefully you can definitely manage the board and then, like, trade stuff away, and this will ping most of the opponent's board. And then you can definitely make sure you'll have a clear board by the time this, like, after this comes out. And the Evo is just, like, free, cute stuff. Like, you'll probably never be using it. Maybe, like, some gimmicky thing where you ping yourself for 9 because RNG doesn't like you. But it's mainly just for this effect, and this effect is strong enough. Unfortunately, its defense total is like pretty bad. Like if it was a 7/5, it would be much better because, you know, we have Splendor in the format and, like, you know, just random ping 4s which are in the format. But, you know, it's still good enough. It clears everything, and it's definitely an effect Blood wants. So speaking of effects Blood wants, I'm just gonna cleanly go over these neutrals because I won't say pressed for time, but you know, I'm sort of carrying over too long for the golden legendaries. So yeah, same thing, like Blood's golden legendaries aren't too good, so you'll definitely take the neutral options you can take. They're all very strong in their respect. This gives Blood a late game win condition, which it definitely needs if it's not gonna aggro people out. This thing's defensive because you might end up being like slow rolling your aggro out, and then, you know, it might run out of steam. And then this gives you chip damage. It kills a reverse snowball board, and this is again super important as card draw. And it's a late game, like, you know, not finisher, but just lots of stats on board, lots of stuff on board. It's especially good in like aggressive decks, so, you know, you'll definitely pick it. So moving on to the silvers really quickly. Red Talon Strike. This is sort of like can go here, same thing with like this card, but it ends up being like sort of okay, like an aggro. Like you can use it as sort of like a pseudo Elfchild May or whatever it's called, where if you need to trade something like a 2-drop, or like let's say you trade a 1-drop into, or a 1 attack into 2 attack, you can use it to buff something and then trade it in, and you get the bat off it. That's like a 1 play point 1/1 with some upsides, sort of like this. And then it ends up being like okay, but it's definitely not good enough in value game Bloodcraft decks. You don't want it in those decks, but, you know, if you're being aggressive, you can definitely consider this card. So same thing with this card. It's sort of like a 2/1 buff because of the way that, like, if you this self pings yourself, like, you know, barring like, you know, the Viro Evolve, like, you know, synergy with this card. Like I'll ignore the drain because it's a lot of commitment, and, you know, Blood doesn't really have the luxury of just having this late game where this sticks on a follower and then you get the drain. Like sometimes it ends up being like okay, if you have like something big on board and then it sticks and then you have a lot of play points left over, like maybe you just want to like snowball by playing like multiple drops at a time. But, you know, sometimes it does pop up, so the drain is helpful in that sense. But the main thing is just being a +2/+2, but then it falls off, like part of it falls off. Like if your follower is destroyed after it gets buffed and then you trade with something, it's not very good. So it ends up like falling off over time. Like, you know, sure, like the random Lust / Dark Feast Bat stuff is cute, but like it's not very strong. Like it's not very reliable in that sense. And, you know, it's not like a crazy amazing buff card. even though it's like undercosted, but the self ping definitely hurts it. And the leader, self leader thing actually hurts it quite a bit too. So Disciple Lust, I was thinking about it, like, I sort of want to, like, switch these things. Maybe it's, like, irresponsible. Like, I do believe, like, I won't say there's no merit of playing, like, a value game as Blood, but, like, you know, I think the aggro crafts do the value game better than Blood, but Blood has a potentially better aggro plan than the value crafts. I'm talking about Sword and Forest in this case. So, like, this might, like, end up switching. I'm still thinking about it. Because Disciple Lust is like one of those like 60-40 cards. Like, it's very good when you're going first, and like even when you're not going first. Like in the turn one, it's like it boosts your win rate so much, but then like, you know, it falls off in the late game. But like, it's still okay in like those aggro decks, hyper aggro decks. You can just weave it out alongside something and then evo it, stuff like that. Like, it's just free chip damage, free extra last words. Like, the self ping is like really hurtful because, you know, when you attack your opponent twice, it's like you're at 18 already, and then, you know, when the opponent stabilizes again, like, you still played a 1-1, and then even though you get the free ping after, like, you played a 1-1, they'll trade into it with something uneven. Like, there is some synergy with this card, which I'll talk about it after. But like, other than getting like some cheese with this card in the early game, like, it ends up being just okay. Like, if you want to be an aggro deck, you'll definitely consider this in the Bowler. But the Bowler is much safer to take because it falls back as a very, very strong 5-drop. So, you know, that's the reason I tentatively have this here. But I do believe that, you know, if you want to be aggro, it does end up being here. So this is actually a fighter. Like, unfortunately, like, even though it says, oh, it pings 2 and it has like all this upside on Vengeance, like, it's so unreliable to get off, like, in the late game. Like, again, it's a 2-drop. You play it when you play it. You don't have the luxury of holding onto it. So, you know, you'll rarely have it when you have Vengeance up, and then, you know, it's just unreliable having Vengeance, having this card in the hand, all that stuff lining up. But, you know, again, it's free upside on a 2-drop. It's just average in that sense. But you definitely have, like, better twos to take on the average sense, so it ends up being here. So Parish, it falls off in the late game, which is, like, sort of unfortunate. But, you know, just having the Nightfall, like, the Nightfall can, like, get you some lethals. Like, if you're on the Evo turns, like, post-Evo turns, and you're being aggressive, you drop it down, Nightfall, the bats are basically uninteractable with, and then you just get, like, free Evos, 3/3s going to face. That's, like, reasonable. And then the Madness Revealed, like, you rarely use this, but, like, it's okay. Like, you know, you can just get the heals off. Like, this combo is, like, more of a constructed thing because this is anti card. Like, it doesn't give you the card, but for the most part, you're just using it as the Parish. Like, the ping one, you can sort of not care about it, and then it's like a free zero play point. Oh, I wrote this as 2. It's a free 0 play point insight, and then you're pretty happy with it in the early game. It's just in the mid game turns where you draw it, where it sort of falls off. You might actually not appreciate it because it falls off in the sense, like, especially when you can just pick some, you know, decent quality silvers ahead of it. Like, it falls off in the sense that you have nothing to play that turn, or you make your entire play that turn, and then this card, you have to wait a turn to cycle it. But it's definitely really strong in the early games. So, this card, it's sort of unfortunate that Blood got this card as a 6-drop. I remember this expansion, the expansion this card came out, I was pretty upset because, like, oh, all the other 6-drops were, like, so strong for other crafts, and, like, this thing is sort of, like, I won't say, like, insulting, but, like, it's too bad they got this card. But, you know, that aside, you know, it ends up being, like, okay, 6 play point 4, 6 ward, that's vanilla, and then it's got, like, the double Evo stats, and then, like, a random free damage to itself. It just ends up being, like, just weird. It's sort of like here. It has like a wide range of reliability. Like, it trades okay when it evos, and it's like the self damage is like super hurtful because like it does it every turn, right? Even if it like lives 2, like the opponent can just deal 7 to it, like counting your evo hit into something, and then it's like super easy to remove. It's like even the double evo stats doesn't matter that much. But, like, you know, sometimes it can get a hit in. Sometimes you just play it as 6 play point 4 6 ward, and you'll be reasonably happy with that, even though, you know, the Evo can screw you over sometimes. So Buller, sometimes it's right to play this as a 1-drop, as weird as it sounds. Like, it's because, like, you know, it's definitely telling you, oh, I gotta play this as a 5-drop because, you know, these things are reasonably powerful. But, and, like, especially in, like, aggro decks, like, this card's, the Dark Maiden's still really good at aggro, just, you know, buffing all your force bats or, like, random stuff that sticks on board. And, like, you know, you can always fall back on the heal, you know, 3/5 heal ward is, like, reasonably strong, too. But, you know, sometimes you just want to curve out with, like, 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and that ends up being very good. Like, what is it? 1, 2, and then 3, and then 4. Like that's like one of the strongest aggro curves you can possibly have, and it's like very hard to deal with. Like it trades really well, and then it puts up a lot of pressure in the early game. You can like pretend you're a constructed deck, and you can do reasonably well at those kind of curves. But it's definitely something to put in your mind. The fact that you can take a 1-drop and not be punished for it, like you can always hold it to turn 5, is definitely very valuable. So, I value it definitely highly, especially if you don't have like some of the good 5s to take. It ends up subbing in as a solid enough 5-drop that has healing and aggro applications for both types of decks, the value sense and the aggro sense. So, Kiss of the Lust, you definitely don't want to fill up on too many of these, especially, if you're an aggro deck. This actually hurts you quite a bit. But, Blazing Breath on silver, perfectly reasonable card to take. Just ping off something early game or post-devote. It's very cheap for its cost, so it lets Blood Snowball. You can play, like, something random and then ping something. It's, like, very good for its cost. Again, don't take too many of these, but, 1 or 2. Well, if you're a value deck, you can definitely take, like, 2, and you'll still be okay with it. So the demon, this thing's, as a joke, this is the Bloodcraft version of Galua. These effects are actually identical, as far as I know. But the self-pings, they hurt. They come on countdown, so you have to wait for them. But, you might be able to get some synergy with that. But, the fact that it draws them, you can play this as a 4 play point, like, sack it off and then draw cards, like, if you need the value. And then, in the late game, 6 play point, kill something, or you can, again, play turn before and then have the is that right? Okay, yeah. It's the ruby or the sapphire. Yeah, the ruby's the one that kills, as far as I remember correctly. So yeah, you can have the ruby in hand to just kill something. That's like very strong in hand. Just 6 play point, kill something, or carry it over for the next turn. So you'll definitely be happy. Again, there's a pseudo card draw on, with even more potential card draw attached to 2 drops. So you'll be very happy to take this in blood. So Salome, this is your 2-for-1. This is super important because blood has very low like value, like things to take back the board from. So just having a card that does this, like it has free buff implications. Like sure, it's no what is the card? The 2/4 Bane. It's like very similar to that card, but it doesn't have the Bane unfortunately. But it has hand buff synergies and can sometimes heal for more in that case. So it ends up being okay. And the fact that Evo is fine enough, 4/7, hit something and then ping for 2, you'll be very happy with that card. And it's definitely one of Blood's better picks at the moment. So Packbound. Again, it's like sort of dangerous like this thing, but you definitely need this effect. Like it's vanilla enough, like 5/5, 5/6 is 5 defense is basically the upper tier of follower defenses because it dodges all the small removals and stuff. So it lives basically everything. You can Evo at 7/7 trades with basically everything that it needs to trade with, and just fanfare draw 3. You're very happy with that. You definitely need it to keep up in the value game, especially in aggro. You're very happy with it, and in value decks you're very happy with it. It's just sometimes the self damage hurts you, but it's definitely a cost you're willing to take. So Dark Elemental. This card was here before, and it's been jumping around. Because it might not be intuitive, because like you might say, oh, it's a 4/4 Dread Dragon with upside. This downside actually hurts quite a bit. And this effect is like weird because in aggro, it sort of tells you that, oh, if I have a 1-drop or if I have a 1 attack on the board and then they have like a 2/3 on the board, I have to trade with the 2/3 and then ping it off with this effect. And then sometimes I can lose you the game because you might not actually consider, oh, maybe I should just Evo and like do my chip damage that way. Like it encourages you to throw away your board as aggro, which is something I don't really like. But again, it's really good in value decks, and which is it may or may not end up being the better way to play Blood in the near or distant future. But again, the last words can hurt you, and I do have to bump this down, or I have to bump 2 of these down in the new template when the mini expansion comes out. So I'll consider it after. But yeah, it ends up being fine. Like the main reason it just ended up being here is just because it's just good enough in aggro, and it's very good in the value decks. Alright, for the bronzes, Throne of Solitude. I've seen some really good stuff like being played with it. Like you can definitely get some cool stuff going with bats or like some random stuff. But like the main issue is just all this conditional stuff on board. Like this is an Omen of 1 card in Bloodcraft, which is like really weird. But all this conditional stuff, like it's not very good. It lasts for a while. It's not too much better than like Well of Destiny, which was permanent. Sure, it was like start of turn, but you can't really trade. It doesn't help you trade before. Like you have to have something live and then it buffs after, and then you have to hope that's good enough. Sometimes it like ends up being like randomly super good. Like you can get it on a Devil Rider that's like enhanced, and then it just pushes it above like removal or like a bunch of random small stuff. But it's just unreliable. Like it doesn't help you snowball, and it's like a dead draw early. And then again, if you're snowballing, like it doesn't help you because of the claws it has. So Crimson Desire. This card's your burgeoning genius for blood. It ended up being not that good because it cost a card and it doesn't give you anything. Same reason the Frostwing Sphere isn't that good in Sword, because it costs a card. Like that card's already good because it's generated from a follower. But the fact that you have to play the actual card in your deck isn't very good, because you have a finite amount of card draw in your deck and like cards you draw in your natural order, and then those cards you just have to play out naturally, and then you'll end up running out of. You have like evos up to turn 6 no matter what turn player you are, so then you're already using those cards for like evoing regardless, and then you have to have like something else in hand that actually cares about maybe evoing or something, and then you have to have that card in hand alongside with this card, and then you use this as like sort of a 2-card combo to like, you know, store it for something unfair later, which for the most part you don't have like that many unfair evos to get off. So this card just ends up giving your thing like +2/+2 rush, and that's not really that much. That's not good enough, unfortunately. But you know, you can sometimes use it as a, what's that card? Forged Weaponry late game. Like, you know, aggro can sometimes use it as that, because, you know, you can always get the Evo point back and just put +2/+2 on something, get a free trade, get a free chip damage, and that sometimes ends up being okay. So Calamity Archdemon. This card fell off as soon as what was that card? Jabberwock. Bandersnatch rotated, because this was like one of the biggest things you would sort of pull from it, like as like a vanilla easy to draft kind of thing, but you know, you can't really do that anymore, so it ends up like relegated to sort of a one of. Again, it's got the problem of being a late game drop. Like you're in no control of the game at this point. Like you throw this down and it's either like super good for you, maybe it can like get you your lethals, get you like super chip damage, and then, you know, this already threatens 11 by itself, but you know, it can get removed, it can get all that kind of stuff. But then, like, you know, if you're losing or if you're neutral in the game, like getting yourself from like 11 to 7, you might invite your opponent to like kill you through like one of their random like storm combos or something. And then like you have no control over that, which is the main concern. And again, Vengeance is like sort of a small thing in the blood pool now, so it's not really something you really care about that much. And it's just being a late game drop. Like if this was like 7 and like lower statted, maybe it end up being like okay, but just being 9, it's like not good enough. You can just draft it as a one of, and sometimes it ends up working. So the hamster, I talked about this with the lust earlier. There's very cool cheese turns you can do with this. Hold on a second. Okay, so you can like get some Parish or some Lust, something like that. Do some like crazy combo where this ends up being like a 4/3 in like the early turns, and like that ends up like you can actually like get some really crazy firsts with like this, and this can trade with both the 2-drop, like a 2/2, and then like the 2/3/3/3, and that can definitely like you can win a game off that. It's just like inconsistent because you have to draw this, you have to draft this first of all, and then you have to draw this, and then again the average case is this ends up being a 2/1, which complements, you know, aggro turns fairly decently. Like you can definitely weave it alongside like, you know, your bat spawns, like stuff like that. But it's not like super unfair in the average sense. It's just, you know, randomly you have it for like some crazy snowball potential where it ends up being like crazy good if you can get like this to trade with like a 2-drop, like play this and then they play a 2-drop and then you play this and then you can kill it, like 2/1 that lives, and then you might be able to do something else with it. Like that's the random crazy cheese potential that this card randomly has. It's just you have more reliable 2-drops, or like stronger on your average case 2-drops, where in the worst case scenario, being a 2-play 0.13 is definitely something you don't want to have. So speaking of 2-play 0.13s, this card ends up being like better because it has a very good stats on the enhanced 7. Like again, the 5/7 ward thing is like, it's much stronger nowadays with like less retribution in the format. Like you can Blood's not very good at like baiting like the hard removal. Maybe you have the Delirious like mid game, but for the most part that's like it, other than like some premium options. Like it's pretty hard to actually bait the removal from them, especially like all your stuff so small. They're not going to use their retributions and their stuff on like, you know, an evo like Succubus or something. So it's like sometimes like sort of unreliable in Blood, but you know, it's still good enough. Like 5/7, you can protect your big board, you can try to snowball from there, or you can just establish this as a single threat and like value decks, and like that's good enough. You're reasonably happy for it. The same reason like this card's sort of like, I won't say like down here, but it just doesn't end up being like the 7-drop most of the times you want it, and sometimes that's okay. You can just weave it alongside 2 or 3 drops. This evos decently, and then it has the free ward that can protect your stuff anyway. So like it's still fine as like a 2-drop, but definitely very solid as a 7-drop. So Summon Bloodkin, this jumps up and down. Like, you know, the better aggro is, the better this card is. And in my opinion, aggro is, I'm not saying good, but, you know, aggro is definitely sort of a way you want to lean. So, you know, this card lets you snowball off 1-drops. You play this, play 1-drop, and then you have like 3 1/1s, and you go face from there. You dictate trades from there, and it ends up being very good. You know, punishes 2-1s, all that free stuff, but, you know, it definitely has its downsides. It loses to 2-drops and stuff like that. So, you know, just draft it sparingly. You can definitely get some just safe enough 2-drops to draft. You can just draft a regular deck and avoid this. But, you know, if you want to be aggro or if you want to just draft 1 or 2, it's definitely fine to take the Summon Bloodkins. So Dark General, I don't know if you guys might know this, but you know, every craft gets 3 basic craft cards. So I'd like to think the strength of the basic cards tells you how well or bad a craft's doing. So Dark General, Razor Claw, and Influencer, those are like really strong basic cards. So maybe that tells you Blood's not in a very good spot right now. So, which is like sort of true. Like we've seen stuff like in Shadow, I believe they had the 5-drop removal. Or they had something else in the pool, I forgot. But it got kicked out and then switched or something like that. But anyway, that aside, all I'm trying to say is Blood's basics are very, very good. And I even considered when Blood was like really good in like Wonderland Dreams, like, oh, Razor Claw was like too strong in the format, which I sort of do agree with. If Blood's ever good, Razor Claw is definitely a really good card in the format. But anyway, that aside, Dark General, 4 play points, 4/3, like that's good enough. Like sure, it's no Zealot of Lust, but getting the free reach potential, like, you know, just a random claw in your deck or random Dark General, that's 7 to the face that the opponent can't really prepare for, and it's always a potential thing in your deck that can give you reach damage. Again, in the late game you can play it over 2 turns, that's 8, like on neutral boards, and again when you're snowballing, which you sort of hopefully you're doing. Maybe you end up doing enough self-damage, maybe the enemy chips you enough, and then you can get in the free Dark General Vengeance. But otherwise, it ends up being like sort of here. It's like your average pick. You have like really good 4-drops to take. But, you know, this can end up being sort of a supplementary 4-drops that ends up being like, okay, with like random late game implications. So Nightmare Devil. This card, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, you know, whatever. But this card ended up being like super good. It like combos super well with like not like 1-drops, but even like Summon Bloodkin. Like it's super good at like spreading boards. Like this into like this was like one of Blood's best like aggro curves, and it still is very strong. Like it dictates trades really well. It's like the Bloodcraft version of the Dragon Alpha Kenio or whatever. It's like super strong, trades into stuff, and then you can live with the base thing living. You can just trade in the 1/1, and just having split boards and just free pings for quite a bit of time. And it's very annoying to get rid of like everything on your board. So it ends up being like very strong. Speaking of another strong 3-drop, we got the Curse Brandon. It's just funny, like, you know, I'm not saying the power creep, but like, you know, 4/3 with like free Evo ping, like that's not something you would see in the past. And like the ping is like quite strong, just like freebie ping on Evo, like 6/4, ping off something random, and then if you drop something else, you can like snowball board quite a bit. Like 6/4 trades with quite a bit of early game stuff, and then it's like super big. Like if the opponent doesn't have ping or like hard removal or like Evo pings, like they have to like trade something relatively big into it. Like it's gonna be very easy to clear with like something like bats after. So like it ends up being like good, and then it's got the freebie vengeance thing on top of that. Like it's not reliable, but you know, it definitely can end up saving you in some cases. So Devil Hand. It was a sad day when this card was Blood's best 4-drop. Like yeah, sure, it's a 7-drop. A couple of like nitpicks with like the Enhance 7, like, you know, it doesn't buff itself when it's naked on board, and then like, you know, some random other stuff, but you know, it ends up being like, okay, it's like sort of unreliable, but you know, the allied follower buff, you can definitely pseudo control it or make it beneficial enough, and the enemy follower, again, same thing, you can make your trades, dictate stuff. It ends up being like just fine, as you know, 3/4 with like 3/4 with like buff and free damage implications. It ends up being like just good enough. The main thing is you have like really good 4-drops to take now, and this thing ends up being like a 4-drop most of the time. Like you don't have the luxury of always dropping this on 7, so just having, you know, better 4-drops to play is, you know, gives it a notch above this card. So Influencer, as a joke, you can just draft a bunch of these and boost your win rate by just facing people who are playing in public, and then they have to close their phones. But that's a joke. Yeah, Influencer. It's just free reach potential. It's very strong. It trades with like everything like mid game, even like some post evote stuff. Like it trades with, and then if you get the trade on like a 3, even like a 5/3, like this lives a threatened storm. Like on neutral boards, like you can just crash it in like 2 times. That's 6 damage already, and especially if you're being aggro, like having 1 or 2 in these decks is like a bunch of like free reach potential. And then as long as the game's like relatively neutral, you definitely can get like 1 or 2 free hits in. Like especially because like it's pretty good at, I'm not saying dodging removal, but like removing this is sort of inefficient. Like you commit 6 play points, you get 3 damage to the face, and then they have to like, it's pretty hard to remove without like followers on board. Even like 3/6, like they have to like use their actual hard removal on it, so it's like very good. And the fact that it's 3 defense lets it trade like super well. You can evo it 5/8 over like 2 turns. All that stuff is like super good to have. But the main problem is like it sometimes ends up being not too good of a 6-drop. Like if you have to evo it on like the mid game turns, like you definitely have like 6 drops, or even like the 5-drop that you definitely want to evo over this card. You want to save this card as your reach / late game potential card. So a Razor Claw, again, your standard 3-drop removal, you definitely need to pick it, and regardless of your deck. Like, self-burn can definitely hurt in some Valley decks, but again, the fact that this hits enemies is ridiculous. Like, hitting enemies, again, free damage potential in your deck that has basically no opportunity cost to, like, take them other than, like, self-burn damage, which sometimes hurts you. But it all ends up being, like, perfectly fine in Blood. You'll be happy to take 1, 2, or even 3 of these sometimes. So Succubus, this thing was Blood's best like 2-drop / 4-drop for a while, but then like I've played with it a lot. It has a lot of problems getting off, just like these cards, because of the way your curves end up being. Like you have like turn 3s and then turn 2s. Like you can't just skip those turns. So like, what are you gonna do if this is in your mulligan? Like, sure, you can always treat it as like always being a 4-drop, but then like you still drafted like X amount of 2-drops in your deck, and you still have to like draw those after you ditch, like you ignored to take 1 mulligan. So then you have to draw your 2-drops naturally. If you don't draw them again, you have to drop this down. So it's weird because even without this tag, this card ended up being better. But yeah, this card's, it's the main problem is just its reliability just coming down. Like when you get this sort of curve, you feel like super amazing, but then when this comes down on like 2 and 3, it like feels super bad. So but it's still like strong enough power level. Just 4 play point, 2/2 draw and play summon Blidkin. It's super strong when you're snowballing. It's basically the same card as the Cavalier and Swordcraft, and it's at common too. So you definitely want to be picking this card up. Speaking of another card you want to pick up, it's basically a 2 play point 4/2 with 0 downsides. I mean, the self ping sometimes hurts, but you can hit face randomly, and then you can heal off that. But for the most part, it's trading. It denies evos. You play it down, and then the opponent can't like evo a 2-drop into it because the 2-drop dies to it. So that like forces your opponent to use removal or like trade into it. It trades like relatively well. The fact that it's just 4/2 for like basically a free. Self-ping can randomly enable some random stuff, but, it's nothing to really care too much about. The self-ping is low damage enough, and it's above statted with, like, freebie heals that can definitely be abused. So so I was thinking about, like, oh, when I do this, I'll either bump this down or I'll bump these 2 down. But these 2 definitely deserve being here more than this card deserves here, in my opinion, at least. But, I'll think about it, and maybe I'll just change the template if I have to. But yeah, it's freebie, right? Like it doesn't cost you tempo like this card. You just drop it down. 2/3 is good enough. Like who cares if like 3/3 is like the new above average vanilla? Like 2/3 will still get the job done. Soaks up 2-drops, that kind of stuff. And then you just drop it down, like 2-drop, 3-drop, and then it makes your 4-drop super premium. Like you can just drop these and then like 4/4 or like split 1/1. So like that's really hard to evo into. Like the evo into it, and then like your 1/1 can trade for free, and then you have the 1/1 on board. You snowball with like other stuff you play after. Like that's all like super strong, and then just being a vanilla drop with like free upside, like you'll play this stat line just like around here, and like you're already hard pressed to take 3-drops because these are all at common. So they're all like reasonable to take, and this one just ends up having like a strong niche with it that makes your 4-drops super powerful. You can like buff your storm stuff, just like random stuff that makes it work. This combo with the Salome, all that random stuff you can get with it. All right, so yeah, the Sword Serpent. It's basically your extra copies of this card. They do relatively the same thing. You know, Serpents might matter, Force Bats might matter in some like random niche cases. But for the most part, they do the same thing. 2/2 spawn 2 1/1s, and like you're very happy with that. But as a bonus, this gets the sort of Voice of Resentment effect, where in the late game, like sure, maybe you might not be as controlly, or you might not want to get to the late game all the time, but you know it's always a free bonus, which you'll be happy to take. You know, Bane Rush, just trade with 2 giant things on board or mid-range things on board, and then you know even if they don't trade with something, just having the Bane Rush or the Banes on board, just 1/1 Bane, so that's like solid in the value game. Like the opponent doesn't have all the pings or all the removals, which they might have had to waste on like Force Bats or aggro. Like sometimes you can just have them on board with like Bane, and that ends up denying like some big wards or big things on board, and that ends up being like very solid. Again, this is just a freebie on top of just a strong enough stat line, which is a very premium. You can just evo it. You even have like, again with this card, you have the split flexibility evo, where you can evo the things as 3/3, 2/2, 1/1, which is like very strong. So how far we've come, 4 play point, 4/3. Like again, the stat line's perfectly fine. It's Dark General most of the time because Dark General doesn't have the proc, and just having like the free ping one is like super valuable, especially in Bloodcraft. Because you know you have the 1-drops or the Force Bats and all the random stuff, 2-drop into a 3-drop, and then this pings off something. Just keeps you super safe in the early game. This thing hits anything, like, you know, for extra reach, extra stuff. You know, the self ping is low damage enough, so it ends up being fairly okay. And, you know, free vanilla stats. This isn't a 3/3, which, you know, in the past it might have been. So again, free stats and free vanilla ping, which is very strong in Bloodcraft and very good. It's definitely a card they need. So Delirious Demon, you know, the AoE one is like super good. It's another like value card which Blood barely has, which allows you to sort of take back board. Again, you can complement the AoE one with like Force Bats or like random stuff that sticks on board, so that ends up like trading with a lot of stuff. The fact that this, again, same thing with like Staff of Whirlwinds when I talked about it in Rune. It just ends up trading enough with a bunch of stuff, and sometimes the fact that it can randomly clear board, sometimes it ends up AoEing board, and then this lives with full defense. It's like really hard to clear without hard removal. So it ends up being super good. Like the Enhanced 7 is just bonus on top. 4/6, and then the free 6/8 on Evo is like super strong. You know, deal extra AoE 1 that's like super premium. You save an Evo. Again, you have random stuff on board. Like this can like wipe entire boards and then live to tell the tale and be very beefy in that fact. Arian, the new edition, you know, this is the Force of the Dragon unit on the basic thing. So, like, that's already, like, decent. Like, again, you can, like, combo it with, like, just stuff on board to, like, trade really well, finish off a bunch of stuff. The fact that you can play this early game is, like, super decent enough. And this thing in the late game, it ends up sort of like the Swordcraft card. It'll fill a similar role, which it ended up being, like, very good in Sword. And then it's right now, like, very good in Blood. The fact that it can just, like, bridge you over to, like, the late game as like a value piece. This thing does chip damage to the opponent's face. It AoEs board. Again, you complement it with like low drops on board, random stuff that might end up sticking over, and then it clears a lot of stuff on the opponent's board. Definitely a lot of safety and a lot of power, and you'll definitely be happy to pick it up. The main thing is just don't like pick up like maybe like 3. It might like clog your hand or clog your decks or stuff like that. So like 1 or 2, like 1's definitely very strong in your decks. It gives you some very strong, reliable late game to draft, and then like 2, most decks will be very happy with 2. Alright, I guess I'll just go over the neutrals really quick. I don't think there's too much changes from this as like a Sword or Forest template where it would look very similar. So again, your card draw, you're sort of hard-pressed to have card draw, but again, I consider you to be more of an aggro deck, so maybe you don't want to draft too many of it. Like, you definitely have like some good enough stuff you want to draft that this ends up being your fallbacks, which can end up being okay, you know, in the right situation. So again, Lyria, you know, it ends up being okay with like Force Bats and random stuff, like complementing it. But like it's not super strong. Like you'll definitely take it when you get like some of these or when you get this, but like it's not like super reliable, super amazing. It ends up being just okay, especially with like 1/3s that simulate the same bubble effect for the most part, where this ends up being a 2-drop most of the time. Genesis is a legend. Again, you can do some very cute stuff with Force Bats. It ends up being like reasonably strong in this, just like in Forest. It's just, you know, sometimes it's unreliable, sometimes in the late game it doesn't matter, all that random stuff. That sort of holds it back. Again, you can just draft it higher, use it better, stuff like that. So Armored Troll, aggro decks like it better. I consider Blood more of an aggro deck, so you can definitely pick it higher. It's definitely not good in value decks, but it definitely can, you know, pull its weight in those aggressive decks where it does quite a bit of chip damage, and it's very hard to deal with if the opponent doesn't have the removal for. So again, your basic, early drops. So this ends up being a pseudo 4-drop. You have really good 4-drops to pick, so you don't really want it as in that case. And you have like sort of a 1/3 ward, which ends up simulating that kind of defensive role to your followers. So you definitely want that. Again, your 2-drops, you're pretty happy with taking these. Like, just random 2-drops to play besides Succubus is definitely something you want. Barkeep, just 2-3. You're sort of pressed to take 3-drops. Like, these ones are the better ones, but, you'll fall back on it when you need to. This thing, again, don't let it screw you over, and, you're perfectly fine just taking a 6-drop. You definitely don't want to fall back on this, and, you don't have too many things to, like, pick in the early, the low rarity, so you can sometimes fall back on a 6-drop. Yep, 2-drop, again, perfectly reasonable to just drop it down. Have it, play it, drop it down, or just get the freebie ping on the Evo, which ends up being, like, good enough. Seraphic, again, hard removal's better for these neutrals, but, you can sometimes end up making it good use of its Destroy 2 or less, or Destroy Amulet, something like that. The 3-drop you might end up picking more. I think I switched this one with the Shadow one, but maybe Kaizo should have been higher, I forgot. I'll have to look at that in my notes after. But yeah, Reyna, again, Blood sort of has trouble like keeping stuff in hand in a sense. So like you have to have a snowball board, and sometimes that doesn't end up happening, especially in like value decks where you're just sort of like at least trying to play a mid-range game, try to play sort of like the old Wonderland Dreams Bloodcraft deck, but like it ends up being okay in that sense. Fount, standard aggro deck, really good in that. Goblin Fighter, again, free draw, stuff like that. And these cards, again, Enhance Evos, really good on your first. Just giving, this thing's really good in Blood, put it on Force Bad, put it on something, be aggressive, stuff like that. Again, Kaiza could be higher, could be lower, draft it as a 3-drop, you'll be very happy. Same thing, Sword Angel, just solid, 2-drop, free Evo things that, sometimes you don't have bats or random stuff left over, and you can end up just getting freebies on Evo. It's definitely strong enough in Blood where you might want to like snowball from there, where you just play this and play like something else to like, have split board. This thing's really big, and then you have a split board. Postal, same thing with the Angel thing. Like, the two 6-drops are here because you want natural 6-drops to play. You don't want to have the Implancer, you don't want to fall back on this, and I consider these ones better. This one, again, if you have stuff sticking on board, it ends up being very good. And, Catalina's always solid as a 6-drop. So Splendor, again, Blood sort of needs that sort of removal to fall back on. It only has, like, Razory Claw and, like, sort of these to, like, get the mid-game removal, so you definitely will take Splendor higher, in my opinion. This thing's always good as just a 3-drop card draw, and then it's not infinite value, but like high value engine. The Rush and the Storm are flexible, and the late game Triangle people are super good. Again, your 4-drops, you'll be very happy to take them, even though you have like really strong 4-drops. You want some ping Evos or like freebie value Evos. Blood's definitely missing out in that department, so you'll definitely be very happy to take those cards. And then the hard removal stuff, again, Blood's missing that in their basic picks, which is unfortunate. It's not in their silver or bronze picks, so you'll definitely be taking these highly. All right, I guess that's it in terms of the Bloodcraft Altersphere version. I guess I'll see you in the next one. The next one will be Shadow, and it should be coming soon. All right, I'll see you guys later.